you go to the airport, you're likely being surveilled more than anywhere else in your life.
Airports are really where the trade-offs between security and privacy come into focus.
In 2015 and 2017, Homeland Security found that TSA failed to stop mock explosives 95% of the time. So are these current safety measures truly effective? This is Incognito Mode. One thing that we assume is just part of flying is going through a body scanner. But body scanners have only been in place since 2010. That's not really that long ago. And they're really only there because of one guy. In 2009, a man accused of being a terrorist flew into Detroit on flight 253, packed with powerful explosives in his underwear. The man attempted to detonate the bomb while the plane was descending into Detroit, but it only caught fire and didn't actually explode. This man flew from Yemen to Nigeria, to the Netherlands, and then to the United States, and at no point was he detected. It's for this reason that we all have to go through body scanners. So what do TSA agents see when you go through a body scanner?
Technology that can see under your clothes.
Until 2013, some body scanners used X-ray, which made a very clear image of your nude body every time you went through, and TSA agents were able to see this. They've since discontinued the use of the X-ray body scanners, and now use a version that obscures any sensitive areas on your body. The types of body scanners now in use are millimeter wave scanners. Instead of showing your real body, privacy software creates a 3D doll-like image and then flags areas that agents might need to check.
Have you ever gone through one of those and then an area of your body gets flagged and checked for no apparent reason? Sometimes the machines aren't working or the line for the machines is too long. So then, an agent will just let a bunch of people arbitrarily go through a metal detector, which is what they used to use. And then just as arbitrarily, they say, okay, that's all. And everyone else continue going through the scanner. So all of these things just make you wonder, what are we really catching here and how airtight is this security?
It's really hard to prove that something is working because of the absence of something, and yet it feels intuitive. We're pretty sure this has to be doing something, right? Knowing that you're gonna go through all this surveillance and pat downs or whatever when you go to the airport has to be a deterrent to somebody somewhere. There's probably been some terrorist attacks that didn't happen just because nobody tried, because these systems are in place, right?
Deterrence is a valuable tool in a security toolbox, but it can't justify all intrusions into privacy. So we can understand that there's some amount of that is valuable and productive, but it doesn't necessarily mean just anything goes. We still want to think about the balance of, what is that measure that is having a deterrent effect, and is it worth the trade-off?
You may have seen in the headlines recently that facial recognition is expanding to more and more airports. Facial recognition is one form of surveillance that relies on biometrics. Biometrics are your personal identifiers. Think your face, fingerprint, anything about you that's inherent to who you are. And that's why people are so concerned about biometric surveillance. Those are things you can't change, can't hide, can't do anything about. You can imagine how bad it is if somebody gets your social security number. But now imagine they have your fingerprint or your iris scan, and that's when it gets into new, uncharted territory.
Once an entity has that data, that's you forever, right? If that organization were to misuse that data, or if it's stolen, or whatever could happen, once it's kind of out of your control, there's a potential privacy risk that just sort of endures through your whole life.
So why is this a big deal? Well, it used to be that all these databases were disparate. They didn't all communicate with each other. They didn't all share the same data. That's starting to change. We're gonna have a big, giant database of everybody's photos, everybody's identities. And the fact of the matter is, we don't really know how these systems could be used in the future. One of the first rules of privacy and security is to limit the creation of data in the first place. And so facial recognition is just another way of creating more data about you that could eventually be abused.
People have said for a long time, well, what's the point of declining, whether it's a face scan or other types of data collection? The government already has all my data anyway, right? For many years, the sort of response to that was, well, in the US, the way the federal government is set up, each agency's data is siloed from the others. Even if you had given data to one agency or particularly like a state level agency, that doesn't mean all the federal agencies or the whole federal government has that information. Both sides of the aisle, like that has been viewed as a really fundamental right. At times, there have been initiatives to try to do like a universal ID within the US, where sort of like all the checks and everything would be built into this one card or document or whatever. But there was always pushback to that, again, on both sides, but particularly from Republicans saying, I don't want the government in my business. I don't want a central point of control of knowing who everyone is. And that's why it has largely remained a state's directive. But now, like you're saying, there's really a movement away from that in this very sort of casual, now this is happening and all federal data is being centralized kind of way, completely ignoring the fact that there's been literally decades of debate about this.
In November 2024, a bipartisan group of 12 senators that includes Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders signed a letter asking the TSA for more information about how they're going to conduct oversight of the expanding use of facial recognition at airports across the United States. The senators warn that soon hundreds of airports will have facial recognition, but they also say people aren't aware that they're able to opt out. You're allowed to tell the TSA, no, I don't want to be subjected to facial recognition. But the senators say they've received reports of travelers encountering belligerent TSA officers who don't want to allow them to opt out, which is their right to do. When a bipartisan group of senators sends the TSA a letter like this, you can tell there's broad concern over the oversight of TSA facial recognition systems. The fact that the senators even had to send a letter like this just shows that there's very little information about how effective these systems are.
Even though things seem to be moving in this direction right now, where all this data seems like it's being stockpiled more and more by the federal government, it's still worth being thoughtful, declining anything you want to decline or you feel that you can, because there can still be value in that, and you kind of never know which way the wind is going to blow and what's going to happen. The data minimization concept still applies.
If you've been to a major airport recently, you've probably had somebody come up and be like, hey, do you want to sign up for Clear?
Do you want to skip the line?
Yeah, exactly. And then who doesn't want to skip the line? But this isn't a government agency that's operating this system. This is a system called Clear, and it's run by a third-party company. An alternative to Clear is the TSA PreCheck program, which is basically the same thing, but it's run by the US government. What is the deal with Clear, and why is there more issues with a third-party company kind of doing this instead of just the US government?
Well, when something is a third party, like a private company, consumers may not have control over what happens to that data, either right away, like you've had your face scanned, by this entity, and then maybe, a company is selling it to a third party or, sharing it with a partner, things like that. But there's also been a lot of situations where over time, a company that holds data is then acquired by another company, goes bankrupt, or merges with another company, and the data starts to change hands. So something like Clear, short term, it's a way to get through airport security faster, but you're entrusting this durable, non-changeable, biometric information with an entity, you don't know where that will lead over time.
Clear works by scanning various biometrics about you. That includes your iris, your fingerprint, and now they're starting to move into full facial recognition. In exchange for using Clear, you're able to get through the line more quickly, and the company claims that using the facial recognition technology will speed up things even more. Clear's privacy policy says that it will share your information with the government if authorities issue a subpoena. The company may also share your information in connection to an investigation into potential illegal activity. You're also trusting the company to safeguard your data, and you don't really have much insight into how the company is doing that. Clear is not subjected to public records laws, and that means it's a lot harder to get information about how the company is storing your data, treating that data, and that they're not abusing it.
Clear says, what is it, in 10 minutes or something, you can, just sign up here and you can walk right through. So it really raises the point of that security screening, taking shoes off, taking the laptop out of the bag, all of those things. Is that really keeping us safe if we can so easily skip it?
Yeah, and it's also normalizing the acceptance of additional surveillance in exchange for convenience. It's not even exchange for security necessarily. It's just in exchange for getting through the line faster.
I think that's a great point. Like we were saying, we as a society kind of created this challenge of long waits at airport security. And now, look, here's this private company that will solve it for us.
So the worst case scenario I can see here is kind of already happening. Like, Clear is not just at airports. It's in stadiums, it's in arenas. And so we're already starting to see this company's mission creep out into the rest of the world, and it's becoming tied to the profits of a private company that we have absolutely no control over how they're going to conduct themselves. It's one thing for it to be the government where you have some say in it in a representative democracy like we live in the United States, whereas a private company, you just have no control. They're going to do whatever they're going to do, and mostly they're going to do whatever's going to make them the most money in exchange for our privacy. And so it's going to become increasingly invasive. Anytime you go to an international airport, you are technically entering a US border zone. This means your devices might be subjected to warrantless searches by Customs and Border Protection agents. In January, directly after his inauguration, President Donald Trump signed an executive order allowing agents to conduct enhanced vetting of anyone entering the United States. Trump's executive order empowers border agents to use more aggressive tactics when vetting travelers coming into the United States. This might mean pulling people aside into interrogation rooms or searching their devices. For example, in early 2025, a French scientist was allegedly denied entry because a border agent found text messages on his phone that were critical of Trump and his science policies. Now, when you're at an airport, TSA isn't allowed to search through your phone. It's only CBP officers that have the authority to do so. While people have become increasingly concerned about having their devices searched at the border, studies show that since 2021, there's only been a 0.1% increase in device searches.
I would say a large number of the inspections that we have here do not include any electronics whatsoever. Is it within our authority to search those items? It is, but we use our discretion when we're looking to use that search parameter.
So historically, there's no huge cause for concern. But that could change. And when we're talking about these device searches, there's kind of two levels of a search. One is the agent just literally looks through your phone. And, some of the advice is make sure it's on airplane mode or make sure you just turn it off and stow it away so they don't think to search it in the first place. The other is a lot more invasive. Can you talk about that?
CBP agents could run more detailed digital analysis on it, potentially even remove some of your data or, copy your data off your phone. It gives them more ability to kind of map out your accounts and start to understand potentially what other data you have stored elsewhere. So that's why that first check, when we talk about what might be suspicious, what might raise some red flags, because you're in that first search that you're talking about, just sort of a casual flipping through, you want everything to look cool and just look chill, because then it doesn't need to progress beyond that.
So if a CBP officer wants to search your device, can you say no? Well, it depends on who you are. If you're a US citizen, you can absolutely deny a search of your device. Your device might be confiscated, you might have some delay, but you'll still get in the country. If you're a green card holder, you may face some types of immigration consequences for denying a search of your device. For visa holders, they may be refused entry and have their visas revoked. From the moment you enter a terminal till you go to board your flight, you're likely being subjected to surveillance from hundreds, if not thousands, of cameras. That's something you've probably already thought about. It's an airport. Of course you're going to be monitored. But the number of cameras seems to be increasing at international airports. At LAX, for example, they recently upped the number from around 1,000 to around 3,000 cameras, and they have plans to expand that surveillance to the 10-mile perimeter around the airport. But it's not just the number of cameras. These devices are also getting enhanced capabilities, such as AI analytics that monitor crowd behavior, individual behavior, unauthorized areas, and loitering.
It's very hard for humans to grasp when we are being surveilled by video surveillance nonstop. And I think the incorporation of AI into all of these systems, it's even harder to grasp the depth of the analysis and information that can be, extracted in near real time about just any footage that's coming in. So our instinct is to kind of think, well, okay, even if we can understand there's all those cameras everywhere, which is hard enough, then it's yeah, but nobody can be watching everything all the time. But AI actually makes it more possible. Let's say an AI system, this can happen anywhere, but an AI system in an airport determined that you were acting suspicious, like, oh, Andrew has a suspicious walk in the terminal today. That is a very subjective decision. So, as AI is integrated into more and more systems, these are the types of things that we all need to be aware of and be conscious of and be, making proactive decisions as a society rather than just allowing things to kind of drift where they will. We should address that. We shouldn't just leave that.
Airports weren't always like this. It's only since the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks that the US really ramped up security at airports. TSA's 2025 budget is $11.8 billion. And according to one poll, 3 in 4 Americans say they trust the TSA to keep them safe. Is it important to take measures to keep everybody safe? Of course, absolutely. Security is paramount, especially at airports. But do we really need to be throwing out our water bottles every time we go through airport security? Maybe not. There may be other ways to do this that are better both for our security and for our privacy.
A big criticism of TSA and airport security checkpoints is that they aren't really effective a lot of the time, and that the core thing that's happening is what's called security theater. This ruse to make everyone feel better that isn't necessarily doing anything.
Yeah, whether the TSA is popular or not, I don't know, but people definitely want good security at airports. If it's achieving that goal, that's great. I think it's hard to know whether it's actually achieving that goal. And so I think that's problematic on 2 fronts. One, because that raises the possibility of something bad happening and it making all of the surveillance and intrusions that we're subjected to at the airport kind of for naught. And the other is that we're giving up a ton of privacy to have something that's not really working the way that it should. And so I think there needs to be a lot more clarity in terms of how effective each and every system and process that the TSA subjects the public to is, and whether or not it's actually increasing our safety or whether it's just making us feel better.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, that it isn't all or nothing. Each component can and should be evaluated to see how effective it is. Some could be taken away, some could be added. It doesn't have to be in one direction or the other, but if we're going to kind of create a problem and a whole industry around airport security, it needs to actually be accomplishing the goal. It's important to say that a lot of this in the US came from the September 11th attacks. And so there was a real tragedy and a real reason behind all of this concern and trying to step up security. But just because there's a good reason to consider or reconsider the security of something and how you implement that, it doesn't necessarily mean that where things have landed is the best way.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm very sympathetic to people being okay with surveillance to avoid terrorist attacks. I mean, we both lived in New York City on September 11th. We are filming this right now in the World Trade Center. The footprints of the old World Trade Center are literally right behind us. And so, we're well aware of the consequences of security failures. But that doesn't mean that we need to live in a world where intense surveillance anytime you travel is just how it has to be. So what can you do if you're traveling through an airport and you want to protect your privacy? Unfortunately, there's not much, but there are a few steps you can take. 1, know your rights. This is going to change depending on who you are, what your immigration status is, and exactly where you're traveling. But just make sure you're up to speed on what agents can and cannot do. 2, use a dedicated travel phone. This is a device that is only going to have things on it that you're comfortable an agent searching through. And 3rd, don't sign up for Clear or other systems like it, and opt out of facial recognition. No matter how belligerent the agent gets, you can always say no. This was Incognito Mode. Until next time.